The gate to Ravensgate Hall had rusted shut, but the name carved into the stone above it was still legible, and Gabriel Ashworth stood beneath it for a long time before he found the will to push it open. 14 years. 14 years since he had last stood on this ground, since he had watched his father's coffin lowered into frozen earth while the Thorncliffe family looked on from a respectful distance, their faces arranged into expressions of sorrow that had never once reached their eyes. 14 years since a boy of 17 had been told, in a lawyer's cold office in Leeds, that his father had died a debtor and a thief, that the estate was forfeit, that there was nothing left for him but a trunk of clothes and a mother's grave to visit when he could afford the journey. He had believed it once. He had spent years believing it, carrying the shame of it like a stone sewn into his coat. He did not believe it anymore. The letter had arrived 3 weeks ago, and signed, written in a hand he almost recognized and could not place, containing a single line that had not let him sleep since. Your father did not take what they said he took. Come back before the last one who knows the truth is buried with it. Now the wind moved low across the heather, carrying the particular smell of wet stone and gorse that Gabriel had not smelled anywhere else in the world, and he walked up the long track toward the house where his family's ruin had been decided, not knowing yet that he was walking toward its undoing as well. Ravensgate Hall had not prospered in his absence. The east wing stood shuttered, ivy climbing through a broken window like something reclaiming what had never truly belonged to the people who lived there. But smoke rose from a single chimney, and when Gabriel knocked, it was not a servant who answered. It was Isabel. She had been 15 the last time he saw her, a girl who used to meet him on the ridge above the beck with a book she wasn't supposed to be reading and a laugh she wasn't supposed to waste on the steward's son. Now she was a woman of 31 with gray, threading early through dark hair, and something in her face closed like a door the instant she recognized him. You shouldn't have come, she said. Someone sent for me. Then someone was cruel enough to want you hurt twice. She did not turn him away. That, more than her words, told Gabriel that whatever waited inside this house was worse than he had prepared himself for. Edmund Thorncliffe received him in a study that smelled of dust and old tobacco, a man now 61 and diminished by illness, his hands trembling faintly around a glass he did not drink from. He did not rise when Gabriel entered. So the ghost returns, Edmund said. I wondered if you would. I received a letter. Did you? Edmund's eyes, still sharp despite the failing body around them, moved over Gabriel with an assessment that felt uncomfortably like fear. And what did this letter tell you? That my father was innocent. That someone here still knows why he wasn't. For a moment Edmund said nothing, and in that silence Gabriel understood that the old man already knew who had sent it, and that the knowledge frightened him more than Gabriel's return ever could. Your father, Edmund said at last, was a man who trusted the wrong people. That is all the truth you will find in this house. I would advise you to take a room for the night and be gone in the morning before the Moor decides it doesn't want visitors. It was not a threat Gabriel could prove, but he had grown up on this land, and he knew when the wind carried a warning. That night, unable to sleep in a house that seemed to breathe old grief through every crack in its plaster, Gabriel walked the corridor of the east wing with a single candle, past portraits of Thorncliffe's long dead, until he found a locked door that had not been locked in his childhood. The old estate office, where his father had once kept the ledgers of Ravensgate's tenant farms. The lock was old. His pocket knife was patient. Inside, beneath a dust sheet, he found the ledgers still stacked exactly as they had been left, untouched since the year his father died, as though someone had wanted them preserved rather than destroyed, kept perhaps as insurance against the day that had just arrived. He read by candlelight until his eyes burned, and slowly a pattern surfaced from the columns of numbers like a body rising through dark water. Rent collected but never recorded. Sales of timber that appeared nowhere in the estate's income. A figure, modest at first and then staggering, moving quietly out of Ravensgate's accounts across 4 years. The very years his father had been blamed for a single catastrophic theft. His father's hand was in these ledgers. But so was another hand, smaller and more careful, correcting entries, covering gaps, and Gabriel recognized it with a cold lurch in his chest, because he had seen that handwriting before on the spines of books passed to him on a ridge above a beck 15 years ago. Isabel's mother. He found Isabel at dawn, in the small walled garden where nothing had been planted in years. She did not seem surprised to see the ledger under his arm. "I wonder how long it would take you," she said quietly. "You knew. I found out 4 years ago. My mother was dying, and she wanted to unburden herself before God, if not before the world." Isabel's hands were folded tightly, as though holding herself together by force. "She managed the estate's books while my father drank himself into debt he was too proud to admit to. She took what she needed to keep this house from collapsing, and when your father discovered it, she convinced Edmund that blaming him was the only way to save the family name, and hers with it. Your father refused to sign a false confession. He died 3 days later. They called it a fall from the North Ridge. I have never believed that was an accident, and neither, I think, have you." The wind seemed to still around them. "Why send for me now?" Gabriel asked, after 4 years of silence. Isabel looked toward the house, toward the single lit window of Edmund's study. "Because I did not write that letter," she said. "And because if I did not write it, someone else in this house knows exactly what happened on that ridge, and has decided it's finally time you knew it too. The revelation should have answered everything. Instead, it opened a door onto a darker room." Gabriel spent the day questioning what little remained of the household. An aging groundskeeper who flinched at the mention of the North Ridge, a housemaid who remembered a raised voice on the night his father died and refused to say whose. Piece by piece, a second truth assembled itself beneath the first, uglier than embezzlement, uglier than a forced confession. His father had not fallen. He had been found at the base of the ridge by a single witness who had never been called to testify. Edmund Thorncliffe himself, who had told the coroner a story about an unfortunate misstep in fog, and who had never explained why he had been on that ridge, alone, at that particular hour of that particular night. Gabriel confronted him with it in the same study, at dusk, with the ledger spread between them like an indictment. "You were there," Gabriel said. "You found him, or you met him." Edmund's composure, so carefully worn for 14 years, finally cracked. "I want to reason with him, to offer him money to sign the confession and disappear quietly, for both our families' sakes. He refused. We argued. He was a proud man, your father, prouder than his position allowed him to be, and in the dark on Whetstone, pride does not keep a man's footing." Edmund's voice had dropped to something almost like grief. "I did not push him, if that is what the letter implied. I did not need to, but I let the world believe a lie about a man I watched die, because the truth would have ruined this family, and I have paid for that every day since in ways you cannot imagine." "Then who sent the letter?" A voice answered from the doorway, one Gabriel had not expected and did not immediately recognize. The housemaid, Nora, who had served this family since before Gabriel was born, an old woman now, her hands folded over an envelope of her own. "I did," she said. "I was on the ridge that night, fetching linen from the drying line below it. I saw everything, and I have carried it for 14 years because a girl of nothing and no name does not accuse a gentleman and expect to be believed. But I am old now, Mr. Ashworth, and I did not want to die with your father's truth still buried under someone else's lie." What followed was not the triumphant reckoning Gabriel had imagined on the long road north. There was no dramatic unmasking before assembled witnesses, no swift and satisfying justice. There was only an old woman's testimony, a dying man's confession of cowardice rather than murder, and a truth too tangled with mercy and complicity to be carried cleanly into a courtroom. Gabriel understood, standing in that fading study, that the revenge he had rehearsed for 14 years, the ruin of the Thorncliffe name, the public unmaking of the man who had let his father's memory rot in disgrace, would cost Isabel everything, though she had done nothing but inherit a secret she never asked to keep. He chose, instead, a different reckoning. He took the ledgers to the county magistrate, not as an accusation against a dying man too frail to answer for it in any court that mattered, but as a formal record clearing his father's name of theft, a truth on paper, indisputable, permanent. He let it be known, quietly and without spectacle, exactly what had happened on the North Ridge 14 years ago, and let the town draw its own conclusions about a family that had already begun, long before his return, to come apart under the weight of what it had buried. Edmund Thorncliffe died within the year, and if there was any justice in it, it was only the ordinary justice of a guilty conscience finally permitted to stop pretending it was clean. Gabriel did not stay at Ravensgate Hall. He visited his father's grave one final time, cleared the moss from a headstone that had never once, until that morning, told the truth about the man beneath it, and had it recut with a single word restored to the inscription, honest. Isabel walked with him as far as the gate, the same rusted gate he had pushed open 3 weeks before as a stranger to his own history. "Will you come back?" she asked. "I don't know," Gabriel admitted. "I came back to bury a lie. I'm not certain yet what's left to return for." She did not ask him to promise anything, and he loved her a little for that, in the quiet, complicated way of two people who had both spent their lives paying for a crime that was never theirs. He walked down from Ravensgate as the wind moved through the heather exactly as it had the day he arrived, indifferent to grief or vindication alike, and somewhere behind him, in a house finally empty of its oldest lie, a lamp went out in an upstairs window. The Moor kept its silence the way it always had, not because it had no memory, but because it had never needed to speak to keep one.